All right, welcome to Module 15, Web Conferencing for CIS 110. So the goal of this module is to look at what a web conference is and to explain the difference between different types of web conferencing and to discuss and compare different web conferencing software. So the first thing is, what is a web conference? And a web conference is kind of a global term that we use to describe any virtual meeting between two or more individuals. So some examples are something called a webcast or a webinar, and there's a peer-level web meeting. So usually a webcast is a recorded session presented over the internet that is sent out to a large audience. The audience can watch the webcast live or on their own time because of the fact that it's recorded. But it's the same experience either way. It's a lot like watching a television show or a television production because they've pre-recorded it, and then you just kind of watch it as it gets released. So the big element here is that there's no interaction between the presenter and the audience. Sometimes the webcast is done live, but there's just no interaction. Think about like a TED Talk or E3 or some sort of televangelist, right? They're all casting just a single pre-recorded session out over the internet. Now, because of that, it usually has a really high production quality, right? Even though it's sometimes live, the ability to control all of the elements, to control the audience, and to control the conversation will allow you to have a higher production quality. So the best thing to compare a webcast is just to a television show. And it's designed, the goal is to spread information, to send information out, but to not have any interaction. The next one we want to talk about is a webinar. Now, a webinar is really similar to a webcast, right? It can also be recorded for people to look at later, and it's also presented over the internet. But the big difference is that if you're watching the webinar live, then you get a different experience than those who watch it after the fact, who watch it recorded. And the reason for that is because the speaker gives a chance for the audience to participate and to interact, to ask questions. They may be more engaging asking the audience questions, or there might even just be some polls or some opportunities at the end for a question and answer session. But the goal here for a webinar is that the users or the viewers get an opportunity to interact with the presenter. So because of that, sometimes this is a lower production quality, but it's a better conversation for the viewer because you're participating. It's not as much like a television show. It's more like if you were at a real conference, then you would normally get the opportunity for a Q&A session, and a webinar kind of takes the elements of a real conference and brings it into the virtual environment. So the biggest difference between the webinar and the webcast is that the webinar is generally directed at a smaller group, at least initially, right? The recorded sessions may be presented for, any number of audience members, but the webinar itself is initially used for a smaller group of people because they can have that interaction. Now, a webinar, that is designed for mass production. It's designed for as many people to see it as can see it, and they don't lose any time because they're not allowing that interaction. Now, the next thing I want you to focus on is this idea of a peer-level web meeting. So a peer-level web meeting is a really small audience in comparison, right? Now, these meetings might not have a presenter, but they may be designed more as a collaboration. So looking at this, COVID-19 pandemic that we've gone through, the peer-level web meetings like Zoom and Skype and Google Meet, those things really expanded the expectation of what a virtual meeting could be, right? Because a lot of companies were required to go virtual, and they found out that these softwares can allow them to have a meeting that is very similar to a face-to-face conference room meeting with a small group of people just over a virtual environment. Now, these meetings can almost always be recorded, and sometimes they are, but they're not necessarily broadcast to the public. So a peer-level web meeting is really about the people in the meeting and having a conversation, having a dialogue with that. right? It's kind of an expansion of video chat. It's not always super formal. You know, like I said, you don't even always have a presenter. It's just a conversation, more or less, between different groups of people or smaller groups of people. So we want to look at a couple of different software examples. All of these more or less are designed for the peer level web meetings, but they can be used for webinars or webcasts. For the most part, though, they're focused on peer level meetings, smaller group meetings, things like that. The first one I want to talk about is Google Meet. Now, Google Meet was released in 2017, and it replaced something called Google Hangouts. Some of you may have used Hangouts before, and it was a pretty cool software, but it wasn't as powerful as some of the other ones that we're going to examine, we're going to look at in this presentation. Google Meet kind of steps up the game for Google and gives them a little bit more capability so they can be competitive with other web conferencing softwares. All you have to do to use Google Meet is have a Google account, just like pretty much everything that Google hosts, right? If you log in with your Stanley ID or your other Google account, then you can just go to meet.google.com and you can create your own video session. And in your video session, you can bring in to up to 30 participants. It's a really good tool for classes. It's a really good tool for teams to be able to have like calls and video sessions and information passed back and forth without having a physical meeting. Another really good benefit of it is it allows something called screen sharing. So if I have something on my screen that I need you to see, then I don't have to take a screenshot. I can just share it, and then you can see exactly what I'm doing. Some of you may have actually done this with me when we were going through Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, or when we were doing the programming. If you needed a little bit more instruction or something I didn't explain very well, then I was able to have a Google Meet with you and explain it through a screen share so you could see it. Another cool thing that you can do is you can meet up through a mobile device or through a browser, but if somebody doesn't have one of those available, you can give them a phone number and they can actually call in and participate in the session. Now, they can't see the video, but they can participate with the audio through their phone, which is usually beneficial because somebody might be driving, they might not need the video session, something like that. So it is very flexible, it's very useful, and it is free, which is a big benefit. Now, probably the coolest feature about Google Meet is that Google has integrated real-time AI-generated closed captioning. So it's not 100% perfect, but if you're recording it or if you have someone who is hard of hearing, then they can participate in the meeting also, and you just need to turn on the closed captioning, and Google does a pretty good job of capturing your voice. It also integrates with Google Calendar, so when you set up a meeting, it automatically posts it to your Google Calendar, so that helps you to stay organized, helps you to keep from double booking because it automatically publishes. Now, another cool thing is Google is generally pretty high security, and we'll talk about this kind of as we go, but the security level for Google Meet is pretty strong. It's hard for somebody to hack into a Meet session.
Microsoft Teams launched in November of 2016 as part of the Office 365 Productivity Suite. You can access it at office.com using your SCC credentials. Look for the Teams icon. It's on the left side at the time of this recording. Some key features of Teams are chat, channels, meetings, and calling. You can learn more about it at shareweb.com. I found some 2021 usage stats on zdnet.com. You can see that there were approximately 250 million monthly users as of July of 2021. The number of participants varies based on the 365 subscription level. At the time of this recording, most frequently used subscriptions have a limit of 300 participants.
Next one we want to talk about is WebEx. So WebEx was probably the oldest of the web conferencing software, and it was founded in 1996, and Cisco acquired it in 2007. So the free version for WebEx can host up to 100 participants. So that's obviously more than both Skype and Google Meet, but you can register for the free version at webex.com. Just like Meet and Skype, people can call in and you can share your screen. So it's really pretty much the same as Skype and Google Meet, The only benefit is that it can host up to 100 participants. Now the paid version, and this is where it really becomes more of a webinar or a webcast. You can host up to 3,000 attendees live in a webinar, or you can release it to up to 40,000 people in a webcast setting. Skype and Google Meet have similar elements, but they're not as broad or as expansive as WebEx. The next one we want to talk about is Zoom, and Zoom was launched in 2011, and Zoom got really, really popular during the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can register for it at zoom.us. It is free. It's available for up to 100 participants, just like WebEx. But one restriction that it has is that your free version, you can only have a 40-minute session. This isn't entirely restrictive because once that session ends, you can just create another one with the new people or with the same group of people, but it's kind of clunky that way. Now, it has over 200 million daily users. So like I said, it got really, really popular, much more so than Google Meet, WebEx, or Skype during the pandemic. People just really enjoyed using Zoom because it was really easy, and it was just really fast. You could do it on a mobile device. You could use a browser, all of that, but it was just quick and easy to use. Now, because of that ease of use, it received a lot of criticisms for the lack of security. There was a term called Zoom bombing. People could join a meeting that they weren't necessarily invited to. And that's really not a great thing, especially if you're a company and you have a lot of sensitive information that you're discussing virtually. That's not something you want. So companies will kind of stay away from Zoom. They'll use maybe the Google Meet or Skype or sometimes WebEx because they have a higher security. But for the most part, for normal day-to-day use, what you need, Zoom is just as good as the other ones, and it is a little bit easier to use. So we're going to look at this comparison chart. You've got the release date, the maximum number of participants. You see that WebEx and Zoom both have 100 participants. Where is it available, the recording, and how secure is it? So this is a chart you can look at. It is available in Canvas. So the assignment this week is posted on Canvas, and I expect you to look at it. You need to choose one of these software packages and create a video session and record a video session with one of your classmates or a friend or an instructor, and then submit that recording to Canvas for grading. And that's all you need to do this week is just have a web conference, record it, and submit it. That's all I have for now, guys, and we'll see you next time.